Colin. The community stands alone. Not alone. ArenaNet? Alliances are on the way. DirectX 11 is on the way. Most important, most fundamentally, and most important, and the dragons stop. What's up, folks? I'm Deeg, here today thinking about the keys to the future resurgence of Guild Wars 2. This is a talk about what? Well, we're going to explore the past, current, and future state of Guild Wars 2. I'm going to offer you some commentary on the game itself, the studio making it, and the industry that it's embedded in. My purpose is to arm you and me with the perspectives I feel we need to choose whether, when, and how to devote our limited attention and finite time to Guild Wars 2 over the next 2 years specifically. So, what is this talk not? I am not going to give an in-depth breakdown of what Guild Wars 2, what its systems are, how its combat works, how its content is at the moment-to-moment level. There are lots of great YouTubers and creators out there who are doing this much better than I can or ever will. Highly recommend you search what is Guild Wars 2, what to play in Guild Wars 2. Lots of good stuff. Number 2, this is not a review or recommendation. I'm not going to give you a yes-no at the end. I'm not going to give you a number out of 10. Again, my goal is to offer you useful perspectives and to help you make the decision about whether or not to play a game like Guild Wars 2. Because at the end of the day, the most important person in the room is you, the person listening to this and making the decision. So who is this talk for? Well, it's for MMO shoppers like you and me. It's for people who have played Guild Wars 2 before and maybe want to come back. But most importantly, it's for anyone who's looking for a more grounded perspective on understanding the success of a game like Guild Wars 2 and whether it's likely to resurge or stay where it is or fall off over time. So, why should you listen to me? Well, that's up for you to decide. Here's my pitch. I love Guild Wars 2. I played it for thousands of hours. And I love a lot of things the game does. I like ArenaNet a lot. I have a lot of respect for this studio. I've had the luxury of meeting and speaking with some of the people who work there, and they're all fantastic people who bust ass and know what they're doing. I have a lot of faith in this studio and a lot of hope that they're going to do well by themselves and on behalf of the people who play in their worlds. I'm also a dude who has limited time and finite attention, which I'm assuming anyone listening to this is as well. Let's get into it. In order to understand where we're going, we have to understand where we've been. And where we've been over the last 2 years, 2019 to 2021, is in a pretty uncertain space. This uncertainty kind of got kicked off in 2019 when ArenaNet laid off about a third of its workforce, who we learned later were predominantly engaged with other unannounced non-Guild Wars 2 projects that were being developed and whose development was ceased. A very sad day for the studio, and a sad thing for a lot of Guild Wars 2 players who perhaps having a little bit of frustration about the lack of perceived transformation of their game, see people who they thought working on Guild Wars 2 actually not doing that. And we all wondered, what's going to happen to this world? What's going to happen? Um, is there a future for Guild Wars 2? Well, in the meantime, while this was happening, Living World Season 4 was being delivered. It was delivering some of the highest pitched, most high quality, bombastic content I've ever seen delivered in an episodic format for an MMO like Guild Wars 2. I'm specifically thinking of All or Nothing and War Eternal releases, the final arc of the Crystal Dragon, uh, let's say, mini saga of Guild Wars 2. A brilliant and potent thing with incredible gameplay and effective narrative beats, in my opinion. War Eternal drops in May 2019. And unlike every other Living World season before it, 1, 2, and 3, it finished with no hook for the future. It finished with a beautiful scene, with a soaring soundtrack, and a great vista that gave a great, this is the end of the story vibe. And I think the truth is that no one knew what the future of the world of Tyria was going to be at this time. But we all got to find out about 3 months later, in August of 2019. One at the Moore Theater in Seattle, Washington, ArenaNet debuted and announced the Icebird Saga. You know, this thing. The Icebird Saga wasn't a Living World season. It wasn't an expansion. It was a saga. And like many of you listening to this now, we at that time did not know what this meant. It was still answering uncertainty in a way with perhaps more uncertainty, especially because what we got to see in this announcement was quite limited. We had a lot of talk about narrative and about story, but not a lot of showing. It was a lot of telling. Also, some promises were resurfaced, like World versus World alliances, that then went very silent afterwards. It seemed clear to me, in hindsight, that the Moore Theater announcement was actually intended for one of those unannounced projects. And this is a sad thing to realize, because it makes the implication is that we're forced to believe that ArenaNet was trying to get something together as fast as they could. And this is what they could bring us. To be fair, the Icebird Saga ended up doing a lot of good things. It actually was, in many ways, effective episodic content for a while, and with some asterisks. But that doesn't change the fact this was an uncertain time for the game. Nadox says, I'm really happy to see you stream. I wish you stream a bit more. I'm planning to do exactly that, Nadox, so look forward to that. Correct, it's unreal to you that Living World Season 4 ended more than 2 years ago. Yeah, it doesn't seem that long ago, right? And yeah, Alliance is definitely worth a laugh, although perhaps less so now. But we'll get to that. So not too long after the Icebird Saga, we started actually getting this content, starting with the Grothmar Valley release, the prologue release for Icebird Saga, which a lot of people loved, and I loved too. It was actually pretty good. But it was still the first step on a journey to where? First time that I, as a player of Guild Wars 2, did not feel like I knew where we were going. Later that year came build templates, which is another really rough moment for the studio and for the community of Guild Wars 2. Build templates is the thing that the community had been asking for years. It's something that the community kind of argued, hey, Guild Wars 1 had this. Why doesn't Guild Wars 2 have this? This, of course, simplifies the problem of templates. There's a lot more that goes into a Guild Wars 2 build than a Guild Wars 1 build. Nonetheless, ArenaNet finally answered the call and delivered a system that was monetized 3 ways to Sunday. And a lot of people who were using ArenaNet-approved third-party tools, add-ons, were suddenly put in the position of having those add-ons discontinued and being asked to fork out over $50 to get a single character into the same place where they were in terms of build template effectiveness. And that was not cool. No two ways of saying it. No one was happy with that. But this period of uncertainty and doubt was not even close to over, I'm sorry to say, y'all. Fast forward a bit, going from 2019 to 2020, and what are we looking at? COVID, of course. And one of the things that Guild Wars 2 has always been consistent about doing very well is everything is voice acted. You don't really have to read anything. In fact, Guild Wars 2 does not elevate the reading experience very much at all. And they care a lot about their voice actors, and they care a lot about the delivery of content that you hear while you're playing. But for episode 3 and episode 4, COVID prevented the studio from delivering on that. And so a lot of people who were still staying kind of quietly tuned in for the story started quietly tuning out, because the delivery of that story, even if it was good, even if it was interesting, and I would argue that it was, suddenly we're in a position where receiving the content was awkward and compromised. ArenaNet did promise that it would come, and it did. They did deliver on that. And I'm not going to blame anyone for the fact that COVID prevented this from getting into the game. I think ArenaNet made the right decision to publish these episodes and then backfill the voice acting. But it was another L in a series of L's for the community. Fast forward a bit more. All of a sudden, we go through a little bit of a change in Iceberg Saga, about a year after it started. And this change can be described by one word: champions. It seems in hindsight, the Iceberg Saga was intended as a half and half sort of experience. We're going to have 4 episodes focused on the development and escalation of the threat from Jormag, the Elder Dragon of Ice. And then another 4 episodes, this is a guess, by the way, focused on the development of the conflict with the Elder Dragon of Fire, Primordus. But after 4 episodes, rather than the whole Primordus arc, what we got is a scaling back of the future content to the Champions delivery mode. Without getting too far into it, Champions was a series of 4 small releases that included a new piece of story content called Dragon Response Missions, which were basically stripped back, repeatable story missions that did actually some things that I think a niche part of the Guild Wars community wanted, which is more meaningful repeatability out of the story content. But what it did not do was deliver the big moments and beats that we're used to from these episodic releases. And it was a very clear scaling back. I remember watching creators who were used to covering each one of these releases and would typically take, a few evenings or a week or 2 to consume the content. Suddenly being in a position where they would log in, and then before an hour had passed, they'd have consumed all the content from one of these releases. A very difficult place for the game to be. Grex, the idea of DRMs was good, but the execution was bad. Very similar to Strikes. Yeah. Well, I think it was a necessary answer to an impossible question, which is, how do we pivot our resources while still delivering on what we promised? So looking back at the Iceberg Saga, I think what we can say is it was a brave-hearted effort by a studio who is perhaps as uncertain about the future of Guild Wars 2 as the community was. And what it was it gave us something to chew on while ArenaNet was getting its bearings. Because at around the same time that we pivoted to the Champions model and Dragon Response missions, we also got a tease. Right? We got a tease of the future. We got a tease and an announcement of End of Dragons, a future expansion for Guild Wars 2. And this is the thing that the community was asked implicitly to look forward to while being served these Dragon Response missions and Champions releases. Yes, these are scaled back releases, but trust us. Trust us. It will be worth it. After a year of uncertainty, we were asked to give more faith. repay more trust. Some of us did, and some of us didn't. So like I mentioned, this was teased. End of Dragons, the third expansion for Guild Wars 2, was teased in August 2020. It featured some back and forth between some characters with a conceptual background showing dragons and clouds and some shots of what appeared to be Cantha, which is the very famous continent from the first expansion of Guild Wars 1 that people have been clamoring for a return to for years. But no idea of what exactly it was going to be or when it was going to come. And perhaps most importantly, with a title like End of Dragons, is this the end of Guild Wars 2? All these questions were left unanswered for almost an entire year. Until June of this year, 2021. In June of this year, ArenaNet announced some changes, both to their studio leadership and to the future of Guild Wars 2. They reintroduced Colin Johanson, the game director for Guild Wars 2 from when it was published in 2012 until about 2016, who left to work at Amazon. Colin Johanson, the hype train conductor himself, is coming back. And not only that, but he's bringing Grouch, Josh Davis, a man who busted ass on behalf of this community, to serve as the head of live operations, focused on the live experience of Guild Wars 2. I'm going to paraphrase here what was said by these folks and what their message for the community was. Hope you'll permit me a little bit of artistic leeway on this one. Colin Johanson said to the Guild Wars 2 community in the studio update release, "Look to my coming at the first light on the 5th day. At dawn, look to the east." And the Guild Wars 2 community said,
"Yes. The horn of Helm Hammerhand shall sound in the deep. One last time. Yes!"
Yes. They said yes.
Let this be the hour when we draw swords.
This community showed up for Colin and ArenaNet and Grouch and Rubi and everyone else. Not in order to promote the success of some consumer
Now
product,
for wrath, now for ruin, and the red
but to
dawn.
fight for the identity we all share. As citizens of Tyria, and I was 100% there for it, fighting. Yes. Yeah, dude. Get that, haters. This community got pumped up, but on nothing but the hope. Colin. The community stands alone. Not alone. ArenaNet? Alliances are on the way. DirectX 11 is on the way. Most important, most fundamentally, and most important, End of Dragons, stop. That's right. That was the vibe with which ArenaNet returned. And with the state of the industry, hey, they're looking at some free real estate. Am I right? World of Warcraft's stranglehold on the MMO conversation has never been looser than it is today. And Final Fantasy, people might look at Final Fantasy as competition for Guild Wars 2, but I don't see it that way. I think Final Fantasy is actually telling us something very important. That the MMO scene is bigger than World of Warcraft, and times change, and most importantly, no king rules forever. MMO shoppers are currently browsing the aisles. End of Dragons is set to release during a time that I think is looking pretty good. About 3 months after the Final Fantasy Endwalker release, more than that after the New World release, when people are going to be picking their heads up and saying, okay, what's the next new thing? Greg's still a hater. I respect the soul of a hater. Okay. But in order to capitalize on this real estate, what needs to happen? Well, it's time to fucking deliver. That's what needs to happen. Right now, the way I see it, there are 4 big promise pillars for ArenaNet to deliver on. DirectX 11 is one. And yes, even if it is 7 years too late, when it comes, the important thing is that it comes confidently and with and unambiguously. Same thing with alliances. Confidence, iteration, get it in. And just my opinion, but in order to really land, in order to really send a message that ArenaNet is back and we're here to stay, they need to get these things done before the End of Dragons release. I know that's going to be a tough ask, but we don't want to be in a position where End of Dragons comes out and these are filtering in 3, 4, 5 months later. People are going to be like, oh, it's just ArenaNet being ArenaNet again. And the whole point, the whole thing that Guild Wars 2 and ArenaNet need to do to catalyze a Guild Wars 2 resurgence is change the narrative. From, oh, Guild Wars 2, that's that game that does all those great ideas, but then doesn't deliver. That's that game that is for casual players. They need to take these narratives and crush them. And the way you do that is with high quality releases that come like this. And the biggest, most important thing is, of course, End of Dragons itself. End of Dragons has to not just meet the standard of the existing expansions, it has to exceed them. Expansions for MMOs should be transformative experiences. That's what they have to offer over episodic releases. Grex, what happened to the Steam release? I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. I have a thought about that. I said 4 pillars, and those are 3. So what's the 4th? Well, it's communication. One of the most important things in this talk that I heard, and in the, this was the first look. I'm kind of smushing together the End of Dragons first look and the studio update, because to me, they're kind of all interrelated. But in the studio update, one of the most important takeaways that I heard was a commitment to communication, even though it's risky. Even though it's risky putting out expectations, even though it's risky letting the players in the community have a say in the future of the game, that it was worth it in order to get that relationship back. And they've got to keep showing that to us. So, assuming that they do turn and burn on these 4 pillars, DX11, alliances, End of Dragons, and communication, what's the catch? Well, For anyone who's looking for Guild Wars 2 to become a much bigger game with more people playing it all the time, the hardest pill to swallow here is going to be that this is not a long enough timeline of success in order to change that narrative between now and End of Dragons. End of Dragons, even though it's going to be probably a big moment for the game, and it's going to be very important, is not going to be, in my prediction, it's not going to result in a permanent increase of people playing Guild Wars 2 into the future. It's not going to be that Final Fantasy moment. Because people are still used to the old narrative of Guild Wars 2. We have to keep having these kinds of moments for a while. Gamers need a longer, more trustworthy redemption arc in order to change their mind about something like Guild Wars 2. And a lot of people already made their mind up about it years and years ago. To my mind, we need to look to the period beginning with Living World Season 6. For ArenaNet to continue raising the bar on Guild Wars 2 and delivering, or not. So let's talk about Living World Season 6. Okay. Living World Season 6. What will it be? Well, let's at least say that Living World Season 6, or whatever it is called, will be the episodic content that starts filtering into Guild Wars 2 after the End of Dragons release. I'd expect this to be sometime in either April, May, or June of 2022. Somewhere 2 to 4 months after the expansion release. And these will be story releases that have new maps, new content for people to play, and will develop the story of Guild Wars 2 from wherever it left off in End of Dragons. And previously, Living Worlds seasons have needed to, generally speaking, do the job of filling about 2 years of time. And why is that? Well, because that's about how long it takes to make an expansion. Which begs the question, is an expansion 4 a part of Guild Wars 2's future? But anyway, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. So during this episodic content window for Guild Wars 2 after End of Dragons, in my opinion, the most critical things to think about. Number one, are we seeing quarterly content releases? I think this is completely critical when it comes to Guild Wars 2 and its audience. Anything more frequent than quarterly would be nice, but anything less than that and people start to lose touch. Quarterly works. Need to see that. What else? It's a little bit editorial, a little bit personal, but I also tend to think, and Grexloid, I imagine you'll have a similar opinion here based on what I hear you saying, that we need an answer in place for what high-end PvE players can look forward to. It looks like we might be getting strikes with challenge modes for End of Dragons. Those could knock it out of the park, and that would be a really great time for that part of the community. But we don't just need to have something great, good for End of Dragons. We need to know what that kind of thing is going to keep happening. For a while, we thought it was raids, then raids went away. Then for a while, we thought it was strikes, but then strikes became this very easy thing. What is it that these high-end PvE players get to focus on? What can they look forward to and chew on? Another thing, PvP. So, Guild Wars 2 has a PvP mode that's 5v5, territory control, lobby-based, matchmaking, etc. All the good stuff. Like an arena mode, but it's based on territory control rather than killing. So, and like for any MMO, the PvP scene is just a lot smaller than the PvE scene. What does the PvP scene need in order to grow, to flourish? People can probably have a better opinion about this than I do, but as an outsider, to get interested in something like this, I would love to start seeing ArenaNet sponsor esports again for Guild Wars 2. It doesn't have to be the same scale or the same way they did it before. It really doesn't. But something that ArenaNet runs Would be really cool to see. Next point I have is that World versus World. This is a major wild card for Guild Wars 2. World versus World is the large-scale mixed PvE PvP mode that pits different realms against each other, and then after the Alliances update, will pit different alliances against each other in order to take control of parts of the Mists. This is one of the most unique things that Guild Wars 2 does, and in the sense that makes it one of the most highly leverageable parts of Guild Wars 2. But I think it's also the part of Guild Wars 2 that historically ArenaNet seems to have the least clear idea of where to go with it. So it's a space to watch. If World versus World can catch on with a broad audience, there's a huge multiplication effect, I think, that can happen on the overall interest in Guild Wars 2. I'm not sure what would be needed there, though. Not sophisticated in World v. World. Grex doesn't think PvP in Guild Wars 2 is revivable. Could be. I believe you. But it's hard to overestimate what a shot of esports money into any kind of a game can do. And I'm not saying that ArenaNet is even very interested in PvP going forward, but it is one of their game modes, and it should be something that we pay attention to, whether they do or don't. Because in the current state, as you say, it may not be revivable. On the World v. World and PvP stuff, I'm mainly commenting as more of an outsider. I don't really engage with that content very much, historically. I also think that during the episodic release windows between expansions, that the game probably needs 1 to 2 Legendary Armory grade features per year. If you don't know what Legendary Armory is, it's a big, long-anticipated feature that just came into the game pretty recently. And what it does is makes so that if you have put in the time and the grind to get one of Guild Wars 2's legendary weapons or pieces of armor, that legendary item is not attached to your character, it's attached to your account. And any character you play has instant and easy access to that legendary gear. So it's a huge, enormous quality of life improver. People who engage with the legendary system of Guild Wars 2 and who have multiple characters. But that level of a feature suggests that Guild Wars 2 is still being iterated on and still has more of a future and is transformative of players' experiences. And in addition to a big expansion release, which is going to do things like introduce fishing for End of Dragons, or mounts for Path of Fire, or gliders for Heart of Thorns, which all transform your experiences. We need smaller transformations of the experience to keep coming into the game between those expansions, like the Armory. Okay. I think the most important thing that ArenaNet could do during this episodic content window following End of Dragons is announce Expansion 4. And the sooner the better. That's going to be the biggest question when End of Dragons comes out. And I know ArenaNet is going to be frustrated by this question. But its fans have something of a right to know whether or not an expansion model is something we can look forward to or not. Because we've been kind of jerked around since 2019. And I know that all came from changes within the studio that were not under the control of perhaps a lot of people. But one of the biggest demonstrations of confidence in the Guild Wars 2 product that the community can look for is an early, unambiguous announcement of an Expansion 4 sometime within the first 6 to 12 months after End of Dragons comes out in February 2022. That's just my opinion. And something I would love to see. End of Dragons, and then, let's say, beginning of, I don't know, Gods of the Mists, something. Whatever it needs to be. seeing some more talk about PvP here. NA.X has what they should do about SPVP, at least make a real action about hackers and bots, at least that players. Yeah, that's like a serving the existing players kind of move. And if you don't do enough of that, then it tends to create a narrative about neglect that's not good for your game. So yeah, I agree that there needs to be a certain level of attention there. Grex says, assuming the 800,000 to 1 mil daily player count isn't a copium moment, then 2% of the player base does PvP, and putting dev time into them improves it slightly just makes no sense. You don't know. That 2% number sounds pretty reasonable to me, based on what I've observed anecdotally in other titles and numbers from other games. But I still think that content like PvP has a place as aspirational content in a game like Guild Wars 2, even if the majority of its players don't engage with it. Now, there's a threshold, like there's a balance. You don't want to put all of your attention into something that no one's playing and people are watching. But look at a game like let's say Quake Champions as an example. Quake Champions is a modern interpretation of Quake, and it has a pro league. And I can say confidently that on a year-over-year basis, more people watch Quake than play it. And that's okay. That's the way all sports are. Think about baseball. I mean, people watch baseball versus play baseball. Basketball, football, whatever. Having a future as an observable esport for Guild Wars 2 would be a great indicator of robust health for the overall game. And that's the reason I'm really highlighting it. Not because I think that it needs to outcompete something else. Grexloy, it sounds insane, but your personal, totally by field estimate of PvP is about 30-50% of players in PvP games are bots. That is a very, very unfortunate sense to have. That sounds like something that really needs a fix. Are you pretty good at PvP, Grex? Are you pretty highly placed on the ladder? Like, where do you fall? Or Grex, do you vibe in platinum as a bot or two every few games? Almost all of them are between silver and low gold. That's not good. It's not good. But then again, am I out of touch, or don't most PvP games have this problem? Maybe I'm wrong. I'm asking myself if this is a Guild Wars 2 problem, or if this is more of an industry problem. Either way, it's in the hands of Guild Wars 2 and ArenaNet to solve, so hope they do. Okay. But let's move on, as promised, talking about a possible expansion 4. And no, there's not like a lore and narrative speculation thing. I'm not the guy for that. But loosely kind of stated, this is about reasons to doubt in expansion 4. So you heard me say it's very important fans to know what we can expect. This is one of the great strengths of a game like World of Warcraft, is fans know that they can expect an expansion, and then like a 0.1 and a 0.2 and a 0.3 release for every expansion, and they're roughly yay apart, and there is a lot of security in that kind of stability. And that's the kind of stability that Guild Wars 2 has never had, outside of a relatively brief period between 2016 and let's say the beginning of 2019. I guess it's not brief when I put it that way, but there was a leadership change in 2016 where when Colin Johanson, who's now returned, exited the studio, and we had the beginning of Season 3, which went right into Path of Fire, which went right into Season 4. And that whole period had the most consistent, reliable content release cadence of any point in Guild Wars 2. But then we didn't get an expansion 3 after Season 4. So kind of put the lie to that expectation. Because ArenaNet has tried, by my count, 2 times to persuade us that expansions aren't needed for Guild Wars 2. The first time being right after it was released. When they were in the highly experimental Living World Season 1, no one knew what the game's future was going to be. This one I kind of give them. This is like watching the first pitch go by for a called strike in baseball. It's like, yep, I'm getting a sense for what the landscape is, for how hard the guy's throwing. Wade Boggs did it for his whole career, one of the best hitters to ever live. Nothing wrong with watching the first pitch go by. But in my mind, I see Icebird Saga as kind of strike two here, where there was a real effort to deliver the kind of quality that fans were expecting. And not just expecting, but expecting from a missing expansion 3 that from a release cadence perspective should have been there. We got Heart of Thorns in late 2015, Path of Fire in late 2017, and in late 2019, Icebird Saga. Give me the expansion features. But Icebird Saga didn't have elite specializations. The the new subclasses that come with every single expansion that are so critical to iterating on the way Guild Wars 2 plays. Again, I'm going to use the word transformative. It didn't bring the big new slap of many zones coming all at once that makes the world feel so big and give you so much time to explore. And it didn't introduce many new systems that carried outside of the content that it was embedded in, unlike the expansions we saw previously. So, in my mind, we need to look to the time frame starting in roughly 2023 and 2024, so about 2 to 3 years from today, to see whether an expansion 4 is coming. Because in my mind, when we hear ArenaNet start to talk to us again about not needing expansions, that is the time where we will understand that Guild Wars 2 is entering an end of life. And the truth is, this is not something that's very unlikely. ArenaNet wants to diversify. We know that they're working on other projects. And honestly, if you like ArenaNet, if you want the studio to be successful and the people who work there to be fulfilled and happy and successful, you would not want ArenaNet to be a one-game studio. It's not a good or healthy thing for any game studio to be. You want them to have multiple projects. You want them to be working on something new while something old is making that hay, which Guild Wars 2 is. I missed my slide trend. Oh, too far. So they want to diversify, but looking back at the layoffs, I think the unfortunate takeaway is that we have not yet seen a track record of ArenaNet's ability to juggle multiple live products at once. We haven't seen it yet. Not saying it can't happen, but we haven't seen it yet. So around the 2023-2024 timeframe, let's look for expansion 4, or let's look for messaging from ArenaNet about Living World being good enough for Guild Wars 2 going forward. In my opinion, it's not. Even though it is good for what it is, it's not enough. And we need to watch. I feel like I repeated myself 10 times. Anyway, and the last reason to kind of doubt an expansion 4, which I don't want to do, but I feel like I should with the knowledge that I have, is that ArenaNet has a kind of creative and experimental temperament, just in general as a studio, which is not a bad thing at all. It's something that you kind of want. It's not the best thing for the stability of an MMO product like Guild Wars 2, but it can result in being delighted by things unexpectedly. I look to their implementation of mounts as a great example of this. There are so many things that Guild Wars 2 does at either an industry-leading or great level that it doesn't get the proper recognition for. And you don't get those things. You don't get the kind of consistent, incredible level of art that Guild Wars 2 has without the ability to experiment and kind of creative freedom that seems to really be cherished at a studio like ArenaNet. Above and beyond other studios we've heard of that are renowned for things like crunch and awful deadlines and timelines. One of the biggest deep breath moments for me was seeing the delay of End of Dragons, which I was really pleased by. I and a lot of other fans would much rather see them take the time they need to deliver a good product and also be ready to go right into Living World Season 6. Because better for us to wait before it all starts dropping than to have it drop and then have there be a kind of a hitch. So yeah, expansion 4, what do you think? Will there be one? Do we need one? I think we do. Curious what y'all think. Glacier Rain says, you agree that the ArenaNet needs to hone the creative edge it has by expanding into new projects, but unfortunately they do not have the staff and resources to do a new project while still maintaining development on Guild Wars 2 to keep money flowing. Well, I think we can say that they have not yet managed to pull it off. That doesn't mean that they can't do it ever. The thing about game development is it's not really a zero-sum game. It's not like you only have this amount of resources and developers, and if you want to make more projects, you have to divide that group up. The truth is, studios like ArenaNet hire on more players, take on more investment, get more money from the publisher when they're taking on these new projects. So the studio can swell and contract according to the scope of its undertakings. There are limits on human organization, and I'm sure there's an inside story at ArenaNet about what the deal with those unannounced projects were. I don't know what that is. I have no information that y'all don't have. But all we have is a track record of one game at a time ArenaNet. I would love for them to be able to break free from that track record. I think they should try, honestly. So I just talked about reasons to doubt an expansion 4 and why we don't know what we can really expect from ArenaNet in the future where Guild Wars 2 is concerned. Now I'm going to talk about probably my least favorite topic when it comes to Guild Wars 2, which is what I think of as its ticking time bombs. Things that are set up to hobble it, that if they're not addressed in some way, in my opinion, could be like a bomb that goes off that really hurts it somewhere down the line. So I'm going to start with the more mild of the two things that I have. I have two ticking time bombs that I'm perceiving. Number one is level 80 boost. Now, there's a whole discussion to be had about whether it's okay to sell level 80 boosts to skip levels in an MMO-like experience. I'm not here to have that discussion. That Guild Wars 2 is way too far gone. The level 80 boost is only one of a handful of ways to trivialize and skip most of the leveling experience. So I'm not here to talk about that. What I am going to talk about, though, is the experience of sophisticated MMO players arriving to Guild Wars 2 for the first time and wanting to jump into the end game where they know the social game of Guild Wars 2 is being played by the active player base. And their vehicle for doing that, which is actually put right in front of them, is level 80 boost. It comes packaged with every single expansion sale. If you buy Heart of Thorns, you get a boost. If you buy Path of Fire, you get a boost. You buy End of Dragons, you get a boost. If you're like me and you bought all three individually, I got 3 boosts. And what these do, which actually says right there on the screen, it says it bumps up your character from wherever you are in the world to level 80. It puts you in the Silver Waste, which is the final Living World Season 2 zone, and one that has abiding relevance because of its one of the farms that the community runs there. And says, okay, go nuts, try the class out at its full power. And if you like it, you can confirm the boost and lock it in. And why this is a problem to me is I don't think jumping players straight to 80, giving them their whole kit minus the elite specs and a bag of gear, and saying go nuts, and then leaving them to do what? Follow the story prompts after that is a good way for a sophisticated MMO player to be onboarded to Guild Wars 2. And I think if Guild Wars 2 manages to catch a huge amount of attention, if it manages to capitalize on alliances and DirectX 11 and End of Dragons and all this stuff, then there'll be more people than ever consuming this level 80 boost, finding themselves in the Silver Waste and being like, okay, I'm level 80. Should I go back to Claypool? Or no, I want to go to the expansion content. I want to unlock mounts. And just feeling like they have no idea what the hell is happening. They have no idea why their character is doing what they're doing. No idea how to start raiding. No idea how to find fractals. I really think that there is a missing part of the Guild Wars 2 onboarding experience. For people who are already familiar with MMOs, but not yet familiar with Guild Wars 2. And I think there are a bunch of different ways to address this problem. One that I've specifically envisioned is a single starter zone that gets packaged with any expansion purchase. They'll take you from level 1 to level 80, walk you through all the mechanics, dodging, break bars, stuff like that, and give you the option of doing like a 5-man dungeon or something like that. I don't know. Give you whatever it needs to be, but give you a lore and combat primer that is not just silver waste with a bag of gear. And maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe that's not the best way to approach this, but I do think what we have right now is probably insufficient. Okay, so that's ticking time bomb number 1, and I'm like 70% sure about this. So if y'all think I'm wrong about this, please let me know. But here's one that I feel a little bit more confidently about, and that's cash shop gambling. So Guild Wars 2 has a unique cash shop. It's unique in that every single thing in it can be purchased for in-game currency because there's a transferability of premium currency to in-game currency that goes both ways. Which is, I could be wrong, but I think that's fairly unique among MMOs. And so what you'll see is Guild Wars 2 over time has been introducing more and more gambling mechanics into its cash shop. The Black Lion chest has become a more and more important source of endgame cosmetic and convenience drops over time. Mount selection licenses, which debuted with Path of Fire, and which became a big enough problem for ArenaNet that Jim Sterling covered it, and ArenaNet immediately responded by offering an alternative to the loot boxes for mounts. ArenaNet has been in a reactive posture when it comes to gambling, the perception of gambling by the wider community, and legally in different regions of the world. And for, I think, your average game, that might be okay. For like a World of Warcraft, I can kind of see it. Okay, that's okay. Like, this is kind of like that's the flavor of the world, is World of Warcraft. But Guild Wars 2 is a different kind of game, in my opinion. Guild Wars 2, the Guild Wars IP in general, has always been presented as being the anti-MMO. It's been a highly consumer-friendly, gamer-respecting world. A place that values you and respects you. And there's no two ways about it. I don't think for a game that is trading on its friendliness and accessibility and respect to all players, that Guild Wars 2 has any business putting gambling in their cash shop. It should not be possible to make a wallet to RNG transaction in a game like Guild Wars 2. And I think this is going to be an unpopular take in the Guild Wars 2 community, because this is pretty well accepted. People have gotten used to this. But I beg of you, if you're an outsider or if you are already used to this in Guild Wars 2, to take a step back and look at what I'm talking about. Guild Wars 2 is the game that made it so that you didn't have to share mining nodes. Because it's not cool. It's not cool to put people in a situation where they have to compete with each other. It has personal loot. There's no sharing of loot drops in Guild Wars 2. There's no drama. It's a game that made it so that even the weakest player with the least amount of understanding of how to play the game can make it through the core Tyria living, the core personal story experience. This is a game that had a marketing campaign all about friendship, about connections. And I'm sorry, but a friendly, open, accessible place about connection and friendship should not be a place where people can lose their share gambling. It's a mismatch. And I think it's gross, and I think it needs to go. And that's me on my soapbox. Like I said, it's wallet to RNG. That's the gambling transaction. And even casinos have a layer of disambiguation where you buy chips before you can gamble. But everyone understands when you're losing chips at a casino, just like losing gems in the Guild Wars 2 cash shop, what you're doing is gambling. And I think if you present your title as something for sophisticated adults with a little bit more of an edge, with a little bit more of a competitive, combative nature, where you win or you die, right? Like a more Dark Soulsy type vibe to the world, then yeah, maybe you can have that kind of thing. Maybe that's okay, but that is not the vibe. Anti-MMOs should not have this kind of stuff. It's a stain. Actually, I'm not beefing with like selling an outfit for 700 gems. I'm not beefing with that. I'm not beefing even with like I spent $25 on like the armored raptor skin a few years ago. I'm not beefing with that. It's the gambling that bothers me. It's the randomized outcome linked to your wallet. That kind of stuff over time is going to be more and more regulated by state bodies. And I would hate to see Guild Wars 2 in a position where rather than taking a moral stance, that they are being forced to take a moral stance by the territories that they operate in. I think that is not a friendly game. Glacier, you need to remember RPG games invoke a sense of wonder and greed and need to find loot and rare items look pretty. I mean, you love the time in WoW and you find, yeah. Yeah, and so, Glacier, what you can do is kind of muddy the kind of investment, right? Or the equation of to say, well, RPGs have random loot, so why isn't random loot from a cash transaction okay? And what about like, let's say that you like buy gold, buy gems in the gem store to buy gold in game to buy gear so you can farm random drops. Isn't that the same kind of gambling? I think it's not. I think it's really about the distance. How far from your wallet is RNG? Anyway, I think I've said everything I want to say about that topic. I ended up being a little more of a soapbox than I expected. But I would love to see in the next year or two, ArenaNet get ahead of this problem and proactively take RNG out of their cash shop. I would love to see that. Do I think it'll happen? No. But that would be another reminder that ArenaNet and Guild Wars 2 actually are all about creating an anti-MMO, a friendly experience for everyone that is highly accessible and highly enjoyable. I feel like I've been dwelling on negative things for so long. Ugh. Let's talk about something positive for a second. Lest it be forgotten, not be forgotten, I do love this game and the studio. Doesn't mean I can't hold it to account. So here's some good news. My read as an outsider and a lay person is that the Guild Wars 2 business model is working, and the game can kind of coast. If you're thinking about the game from a basic survival perspective, there's no reason ArenaNet can't keep printing out episodic content, and whenever they feel like it, make an expansion to get to kind of re-secure people's interest. It is a stable game with a working business model, with a stable core community that's invested in it and that cares about it. And like I mentioned before, it has core game systems that are either industry leading or great. Like there's so much here to love, whether or not this game ever blows up to a place that's bigger than it is today. And that's worth repeating. And that reemphasizes what I said at the very start of this talk, that the most important factor in deciding whether or not to pay attention to a game like Guild Wars 2 is you. What sparkles for you? What shines and seems important? And what grabs your attention? That's the most important thing. Next. Remember this image? Here I want to talk about just a couple of opportunities, and we are drawing this talk to a close here. Some opportunities that are out there on the table for Guild Wars 2 and its future that I think could potentially result in a sea change in terms of overall engagement. Number one, this was the image used for the at the time teased Steam release of Guild Wars 2. That Steam release was pulled back and canceled. We currently have no expected date on a Steam release for Guild Wars 2, and in fact, my analysis, I don't think we'll see a Steam release for Guild Wars 2 until we reach end of life. The technical reasons for this are interesting, but I don't think it really matters that much. I think that the story for me is that going to Steam is kind of a cash out for Guild Wars 2, where they'll take the thing that they have and try to get the biggest audience they possibly can at the expense of not getting as high of a return per user as they get by being on their own platform, which they are now. But a Steam release could happen. I could be wrong. And if that does happen, it's going to make the game bigger. And it'll probably be a forever change for the positive in that sense. Another opportunity, and this is kind of suggested to me by the DirectX 11 implementation, which is that Guild Wars 2 is a game that can and should play pretty well on consoles. I don't mean in terms of technical and that kind of stuff. I mean in terms of the presentation, in terms of the way the game controls, the fact that it's quite actiony. It actually has an action combat camera built into it. It could play pretty damn well on consoles. And I'm not going to say this is likely because I have no reason to suspect this, but in a world where DirectX 11 is a thing and Guild Wars 2 is being updated to be relevant with future graphics APIs, maybe we can look to like an Xbox or PlayStation release for this game, and that would be pretty major. I could even see a world where this all is a cross-play thing, and that would be a couch Guild Wars 2 experience is a thing I think a lot of people would really enjoy. The kind of episodic content where you get a new world, a new map to explore, a new part of the world, a new story to experience. You kind of lean back with your controller, you bop through it, and you do some combat, listen to some story, talk to some people, listen to some great music, and watch some great art. I could so easily see that being a fit for Guild Wars 2. And if that were a thing to come to pass, that would be a pretty major change for the game. Grex Lloyd, there are already some people who play with a controller on PC. Yep. I think I've seen there's that one guy whose name I can't recall, who's put a lot of time and effort into standardizing the controller approach to Guild Wars 2. I know it can be done. Glacier, going back to the Steam thing, I wonder how much a Steam release would help the game's popularity. You just felt like it isn't a priority. I think it would be a major increase to popularity, but it would, being on Steam, cuts into the amount of money that ArenaNet can make off people who buy the game and who, I'm not sure how microtransactions work, but I think Valve takes a cut of that if your game is on Steam as well. I don't know for sure, but what you're doing is trading having a much bigger audience, which Steam will, I think, undeniably attract. There's a good track record of games being re-released on Steam and getting a huge population of players. There are a lot of people who look to Steam for answering their questions of what am I going to play today? And a free-to-play game on Steam is like, boom, one of the biggest, best ways to get your message out there. Rex Lloyd, if I had to guess, I'd say they realized that without DirectX 11, Guild Wars 2 would just get review bombed for trash performance on Steam. I don't know about that. No, I see the DirectX 11 as it's pretty cool that it's going to bring a higher performance floor for a lot of players. I think we can expect that for sure, but I think DirectX 11 is less about that, and it's more about opening the door on future graphic stuff that they know they want to do and limitations that they have with DirectX 9. I don't think a game like Guild Wars 2 goes to a product, undertakes something like this, unless it's future facing, unless it's about future development. And if we're looking towards just improving experience we're already having, I don't think that that's important enough for most of the time to be worth this kind of effort. So, yeah. And the last note I have in this crazy ass talk about the keys to Guild Wars 2's future resurgence. Speaking of Steam, the last thing I'll say, thinking about the overall environment of MMOs, is I think that as time goes on, we're going to be seeing more MMO stuff bleed into mainstream games. We're going to have the niche of MMOs be more and more eaten up by these other genres of games, which is not a great thing for MMO gamers. Well, sorry, it's not a great story for MMO studios. One of the things I'm kind of predicting here on the MMO scene, in the overall gaming scene, is a situation where rather than trying to find one game world that has your PvP experience, your story your experience, your group adventure experience, what people are doing is they're congregating in places like Twitch and Discord and finding the best games that have each of those experiences. It's something that's kind of already happening naturally. It's only a matter of time before we see publishers with many with a lot of heft start to introduce some kind of cross game progression that can go across multiple titles and hook through multiple experiences, maybe with a kind of hub world, something like that. But to see the MMO experience be more distributed and what's good about it be taken elsewhere. My argument here is that hubs like Discord and Twitch are reducing the need to have a shared world for people to come together. And that's something that I'm watching out for. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it seems pretty right to me. And the next major disruption probably that will happen in the overall scene would be, the introduction of a new kind of human interface technology, which could be anything. Who knows what the next thing is going to be? Is it going to be a brain interface? Is it going to be glasses we wear with augmented reality? I don't know. But those kinds of things had the potential to transform the way we play all games. And when that happens, it's kind of the Wild West about what's next. And yeah. Boy, that talk took a lot longer than I thought it would. Guild Wars 2. And the keys to its future resurgence. I hope it does resurge. I really like this game. What do y'all think?